Hi there, Michael here. Just before we get into the podcast, a really brief personal fundraising message. I'm running the Lake District 100 kilometres on the 4th of July on behalf of Pancreatic Cancer UK. Pancreatic cancer is a disease with really high mortality rates post-diagnosis. About 50% of all people diagnosed with pancreatic cancer die within 3 months of diagnosis, and only 2% survive beyond 5 years. Now, I'm truly blessed to know someone who has survived beyond that 5-year period. And so this run is, in part, saying thanks and being grateful for that, but also helping to fund the future research that will improve these survival rates. And some of the research is really cool and cutting edge. If you're able to donate, that would be absolutely amazing. The website address is www.justgiving.com/page/Michael-Butcher-1. That's justgiving.com/page/Michael-Butcher-1. Thanks very much. Let's get into the podcast. So, Francesca, what's the one thing that you wish people knew about social care?
I think a lot of people focus when it comes to social care on the processes. Now, as I'm sure I'll explain, and as you know, Michael, we work more in the youth section of social care rather than the elderly section of social care. But the one thing that unites them across both of them is often the tendency is to look at how the process is, how are things organised, when actually what often matters more than anything is the relationships that are made there, because that's what's going to stop somebody feeling lonely or isolated, make them feel more settled. So if I was talking to somebody that was looking at the social care sector, whether that be for a loved one or for somebody that they're trying to place because they need support, what I would say is look at what those relationships are like. What's the kind of gut feel around how people are looked after and cared for? Because that's what makes more difference than whether something looks pretty or whether they've got really great systems in place. The systems are important, but only if it empowers the human connection and the relationships.
Talking from a purely older person perspective, I think it'd be absolutely fair to say that the majority of the system that we encounter on a day-to-day basis just doesn't do that. Local authorities, as one of our previous guests has said, do not always follow the Care Act. The systems aren't. It almost seems adversarial at times. With where you are in the younger person sector, is that still the case, or is it slightly better?
Yeah, I would know. I mean, I don't know like for like the comparison, but I would say it's a very similar set of circumstances in the fact that within the sector, you have a lot of very well-meaning, great people, but the reality is they are so stretched. And again, talking from our space in the youth sector, they're so immensely stretched beyond capacity that often it's very much about fulfilling and ticking the boxes of the system than it is around the relationships. And that's one thing that we've done as an organisation is look at actually how can we flip that around? How can we stop talking numbers and start talking impact and people? But yes, I would say it is the same thing. And that's the sort of the gold that we're looking for in this space is where are those relationships healthy? Because where we see really great really great humans thriving is where everything else then starts to fall into place. And if you're looking at younger people at the beginning of their journey, the more we can give them the mental resilience and strength and happiness and joy that they need, the more likelihood there is that they are going to go down the right paths and succeed. But it is one of the hardest things to do in stretched systems when these systems have a lot of regulations on them, which is important because it's really important that we can understand that systems are being delivered properly, but at the same time delivering them properly and then actually getting really great outcomes can sometimes be like pull against each other almost.
I guess trying to get good outcomes for young people is incredibly difficult at the best of times. I'm the proud owner of 2 teenage children, and getting them up and going to school, and my son's about to start his GCSE exams. That's challenging enough, let alone the individuals that you're dealing with all of their life trauma and everything else that's going on with them. You wrote online around that having care experience as someone who has been in care it feels like a stigma sometimes. and you just mentioned about this mental resilience. What is it about our system that perpetuates that?
It's a super interesting question because if you look, you only have to look back in the press from last year that it was very well documented that a counsellor said that all children in care, this was in a public meeting, he said all children in care are evil. And there is this perception that children, there's a perception around blame. Now, I have to be really honest. I was very fortunate. I didn't come through the care system. I had a loving family. So I'm not talking from direct experience. And there are, but for the work that I do, I feel it's really important to always listen to those with the care experience. And the consistent story that we're told is that well, actually, probably going back a step, Michael, it's not just the experience of of people that are care experienced, but it's also the perceptions of those that are not. And there is this sort of public perception that the reason that sometimes kids end up in care is because they're bad kids. You know, they were so bad their parents couldn't cope with them, they ended up in care, which is not the case at all. Unfortunately, these are some of the most deserving and wonderful young people. And because of no choice of their own, or as I've often heard it called, the lottery of birth. They were just born into a circumstance where maybe their parents weren't able to look after them, maybe their parents weren't around, maybe they are in a really unfortunate situation where they lost their parents. And for whatever the reason is, it's not their fault. But what happens is that this grows this stigma, and I'm not really sure where it came from, but I did hear one of the most empowering things I've heard is people talk about how actually when our social care system is good, that is the best of civilization. We often look at care as being when things have failed, when things have gone wrong. But the reality is being a human is messy, and nobody is going to get through their humanity without some mess in their journey. So actually when the social care system comes in, we should be looking at that is the best of our society. That is when we're stepping up to help those who aren't in the best position, rather than looking at it because that's the reason they need care, because something's failed. And I think it would be so great if we could try to shift those perceptions, because if you look for stories of hope, if you look for stories of optimism, if you look for stories of people fighting against the odds, it's often in our care system where those stories are, not just in general society. So I think it's understanding that that's where we should be looking, but there definitely is that stigma attached to it. And I guess we often talk with our young people about don't ask them what's wrong with them, ask them what's happened to them. The reason that maybe a young person comes across in the way that they do might not be because there's anything wrong with them. It might just be that they have faced some really difficult circumstances that means that maybe they're a little bit more fearful of strangers, or maybe they're a little bit more guarded in their communication. Absolutely naturally, if your life experience had led you to believe that most adults will potentially disappear in your life and so on, of course when they come into your life you're going to be a bit more guarded. So understanding that that's their perception means that we can then understand how they react, and then we can respond in how we react to them to make sure that we eventually meet them where they're at and can then build these really wonderful relationships.
So just want to pick up on what you said around the concept of blame and stigma. That almost I hear echoes there of a very Victorian ethos of the undeserving poor. The creation of the workhouses and these people. You don't want to work. You could work, and therefore you're going to go to this place where living is not even as good as it would be, even if you could work at a subsistence level. It's designed to be a negative environment. It doesn't sound like actually we've moved beyond that as a society.
As they often say, everything the Victorians built, they built so well it didn't break, including a lot of their stigmas, dare I say. So yes, I mean, I agree. I think you're spot on that there is this stigma that's come back from those very early days and again, if you even looked back, and I'm not the best historian in the world, but if you look back to the children that got in trouble in the Victorian times, often it was because they were stealing food. Why were they stealing food? It wasn't because they were a bad person, it was because they were desperately hungry. But when you don't have the when everybody is fighting for their own survival, it's really hard sometimes to put yourself in someone else's shoes and actually see what is their perspective. Why have they got to where they've got to? Why are they acting like they're doing? Why are they doing what they're doing? And when you just look at the outcomes of that behaviour and you don't look at what's got them there, it's really easy then to make assumptions such as this is a bad person. Whereas actually when you step back and go, why are they behaving like that? Suddenly it all makes sense. So I think, as you say, that stigma comes even from Victorian times. It's even perpetuated in media, in terms of if there's a bad kid in a program, it's probably because they've got no parents around. Like all of those kind of things, it's always perpetuated. Whereas actually when you take these individuals for who they are and you strip back all of those layers, there are some really incredible stories there and some incredible young people that just need a hand.
Mm. So you obviously spoke earlier about how we need to engage people who are experienced in care, and the other side of that is getting people who are not experienced in care to experience care. Let's just let's just unpick a little bit about what Goal 17 does, because I think what you offer actually to the volunteers who operate within Goal 17 is almost as valuable then in terms of shifting perspectives as it is to the actual underlying children you're working with. So why don't you just explain what Goal 17 does?
So at Goal 17, what we do is we develop volunteer-led mentoring programs specifically for young people, some older people, but mainly for young people. A majority of the young people we work for are either in the care system or have recently left care, which is labelled as a care leaver or care experienced. And our idea is that we go out into the communities where those young people live and find volunteers from within their communities. Sometimes it's geographical communities, sometimes it might be their interests or communities around that, but find people from all sorts of backgrounds. So some of our volunteers will be care experienced themselves, but some will be from all sorts of other backgrounds. And the reason that I actually ended up doing this, because often people say, well, why are you doing this? The reason that I ended up doing this was because I actually mentored a young girl. I met her through a work environment. She came to work for me in a job role, and I was absolutely fascinated by her. She was super high impressive, really motivated, really driven. She was old beyond her years. She had this wisdom that it was palpable. You couldn't understand where it had come from. And yet there was something about her that really intrigued me. And she asked me if I would mentor her. And because I was so intrigued by her, I said, of course I would mentor her. And once I started mentoring her, she told me that she was a care leaver. Now, if I'm brutally honest, I didn't know what that meant. I knew that she'd been in care and she left, but I had no concept of the challenges that she must have faced to get to her age. At the time, she was about 22 years old. So to get to that age and to still be working and to still be kind of making her own path, I had no concept of what that had taken. And the more I mentored her and the more I learned, the more angry I got. I was like, oh my goodness, like there's me thinking we live in a civilized society. I can't believe we're sort of almost, theoretically abandoning these young people when they're 18 and telling them just to get on with it themselves. And I was so shocked and so angry. My first response was, I need to campaign. Like people need to know about this. And of course, once I started looking into this, I found there were some incredible campaigners in this space who are doing amazing work in fighting policy, in raising awareness. And most of those people are care experienced, and they are the right people to be doing that campaigning because they can talk from a really kind of, from their heart and really explain what it's like. And I will champion them every day of the week. But what I also realised was that there were a lot of people out there just like me. Dare I say, white middle class people or, whatever background they were, who had no idea that this was going on their doorsteps, like right outside their front door. There could be a young person walking past them. It's almost guaranteed if they walk down to their high street, a young person's going to walk past them and they'll have no idea that young person is 18. Maybe they're in college. They're now having to work 2 part-time jobs just to stay in education. They're living in a hostel. They have no support network. And then they might look at that young person and go, oh, they look a bit rough, and not realise the challenge that young person is facing. So I realised if more people like me could know about this, then how much better could we then look at trying to support those young people? And that was very much my sort of as well as genuinely wanting to help young people and the young people that we mentor, it was also just as much about opening the eyes of people like myself. And we encourage all of our mentors, not just to mentor, but to go and be those advocates, to go and be the people within their communities, within their workplaces, that start championing some of these young people and saying, they've got real potential, but they need this extra layer of support because of what they've already had to face.
Mm. And so the mentoring that you provide, I mean, what sort of forms does that take?
It's a really interesting question, because when people think of mentoring, they often think of face-to-face meetings, a meeting maybe like this online, or we go to a cafe, we have a meeting and so on. That is what we're sort of talking about. But one thing that's been really interesting since we've been delivering our service is we've discovered that the way that young people communicate has fundamentally changed. They actually, a lot of the time, find those kind of face-to-face meetings quite intimidating. And again, especially when they've been in the position where they've kind of battled social care systems and so on, any kind of meeting feels very statutory, feels very... We've had young people tell us, why should I meet with another adult? They're only going to let me down. It feels very manufactured. So, and you'll know this, Michael, you said you've got teenagers yourself. Getting them to communicate, to sit down, do a face-to-face meeting is really tough. Whereas actually how they communicate, what they like to do is message. So most young people, if your kids are anything like mine, if I want them to come down to dinner, I'd probably be better off sending them a WhatsApp message than I would actually asking them to come down. They like to message. That's how they like to communicate with each other. So we're always very much listening and responding to what our young people want. And so when we originally started Goal 17 nearly 10 years ago, it was very much about sort of facilitating these one-to-one meetings. And then throwing a bit of COVID into that has massively evolved. Whereas now what that looks like is actually we connect people up through digital channels. We have our own safeguarded digital channels that we connect young people up so they can chat to a mentor on WhatsApp. And what inevitably happens is they chat away. Sometimes it's just short, how are you today? Did you see Traitors last night? Whatever it might be. Other times it might be, hey, what are you working on at the moment? How can I support you? So it starts with this layer of chat. And then if that goes well, which majority of the time it goes very, very well, once that young person realises this isn't another statutory service, this isn't someone from the system, as they call it, it's somebody that is different, that is outside the system, that's not going to report on them, that's not there to tell them what to do, they're just there because they care. And also interesting, I should say, it's really key that all of our volunteers are actually volunteers. The mentors are volunteers, so the young people know that that person's not there because they're paid to be there. It doesn't mean that people that are paid to be there are any less deserving of being there or do any less good work. It's just a psychological barrier. If I know that you're here, but you're paid to support me, it's not the same as if you're here just because you want to be. And for many of those young people, it is actually the first adult in a long time that's been there just because they want to be, not because they're paid. So they build this slightly different relationship. That chat continues, and inevitably, on average, in about 3 months, we start seeing calls have happened, and then they start meeting face to face. But what they're actually helping them with can be anything from just having someone to have a chat with, to having having a young person that says, look, I really want to do this. How do I do it? Can you help me? Can you help me make this change in my life? It could be a young person disclosing a safeguarding concern they've never felt they could disclose to anybody else. It could be all sorts of things, but it's really giving that young person the opportunity to have a relationship that is just about care and support and not about any other agenda.
Mm. In a sector which is largely defined by quite significant churn of the people working within it. I know in older person care we have, I think nationally 30% of our workers change roles every year. I would presume that a similar statistic exists in the youth section of social care. Your statement that why should I invest in you because you're just going to leave me is actually something that they see every single year, that there are their support workers who they've invested in this relationship with. Oh, they've gone. Oh, no, they've moved on. What are the young people you're working with? What's their view of the system? Do,
usually reasonably negative, dare I say, and I don't. There's an element of that that's not completely to blame the system for, because it is a system, right? It is it's never going to feel natural and comfortable. Or I mean, maybe we're hoping, and a lot of people are making great strides forward to make it feel more, more natural and more like a family and so on. But it's always going to challenge that, and I think there is always a lot of generally the young people we talk to are quite negative about the system. Now, they might be quite positive about a particular social worker that's really supported them. But when they look at the system, what they're looking at is somebody that surveys them a lot, somebody that has to tick a lot of boxes for them, somebody that maybe has created disruption in their lives that they maybe have not fully understood. So, for example, if they've moved a placement, or even in some cases, if they've been taken into care in the first place, the fact that they've even gone into care is, they may not fully comprehend and understand why that's happened. Although, again, I should say that huge amounts of strides forwards have been made in recent years to make sure that young people do get a better understanding and they do have a better journey and understanding of their journey. But all of these lots of small contributing factors mean that they generally don't trust it. And even if they did trust it, you imagine you're a 15-year-old going into school and everyone else has got parents and you haven't. Your peers are going to ask you questions that make you not trust the system and make you confused. So you've got this, not only have you got this complexity of of all of this change happening, you're also a teenager, or you're also a young person going through a transition. And I imagine it's very similar, actually, Michael, in the older social care space as well, because it's at a time when people are going through challenges and changes around their physicality and their health, and maybe their mental health and all of those things. So these systems come in usually at a time when there's a lot of change, and therefore they're already sadly almost on a back foot, because there's already change happening, and even the smallest additional bit of change onto that can feel extra disruptive when there's other changes that are outside that person's control.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really valuable reflecting on. You made a point earlier that the people involved in almost creating the care system are typically not care experienced, and I think that on the one hand, yes, the 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 system is almost tangential to the care that it provides.
Mhm.
It's people with limited experience who have sort of, oh, we should do this because this is in the person's best interest.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but have you spoken to the person? Um, One thing that I am hopeful for, and this perhaps you can correct me on this, is I think that some of the best, sorry, rephrase it. I think some of the people who are best able to care
Mhm.
are those who are emotionally in tune and have got this a really heightened emotional intelligence. I think it would be fair to say, in my experience, that the younger generations coming through, particularly those sort of aged 20 to 25 at the moment, really demonstrate that. So actually, I have hope that there's this wave of emotionally aware children coming through the ranks who won't be able to fulfill this care. Is that something that you experience with people that you work with, that actually they are naturally drawn back into care?
So a lot of the young people that we work with will, if you ask them what they want to do for a living when they're older, usually three jobs come up the most. One is a YouTuber, which I think is just, is just I think that's every young person. This is slightly out of date, because I don't think they probably want to be a TikToker now, but there we go. But the other two jobs that come up more often than not is either a social carer or a teacher. And there's been some debate in this space around, is that because those are the only two roles that they are aware of? Because if you're a young person and you don't have a family network, for example, you might never have been exposed to many other career opportunities. And one of the things that we do is we make a real effort, if we can, to expose young people to other opportunities, in the same way that I always sort of talk about how we treat our young people as if they were your own child to some extent. If your child turns around and has a little bit of an interest in something, you help them explore it and go, oh, did you know you can do a career in that, or whatever it might be. So there is an element of exposure on that. But I do think young people that have experienced care, they've experienced the good and the bad of it, so they can come from a place of really knowing what works and what doesn't work. And as you say, have it's almost beyond an empathy. It's a deep understanding of what that means, what it feels like when something happens to you that maybe is out of your control, or you don't have the choices that you wish you had. And I think there is something really super valuable in that. I couldn't necessarily comment on the kind of age group as a whole, but I do again think there is greater awareness out there of the different challenges. And I think we're at a time in our history where more and more there's more access to information and there's more willingness to listen to different perspectives. In some cases, we won't get political today, but young people do want to hear how other people feel and what they think and so on. And I think that element means that they're getting a greater worldview. On the flip side, you could argue that now lots of views are being polarised because of the channels that they look at and how those are polarising young people. But I think that lived experience, I also think one thing that's super interesting is there's a huge amount of uncertainty at the moment, both in terms of economy, in terms of, just general society. Is AI going to take over the world? All of that kind of stuff. And we're seeing a lot of young people kind of sort of nodding to that, but going, but I want to be authentic. I want to be me. And there's more authenticity, I think. And that is where I think it's really powerful.
What do you think? I think hearing the phrase authenticity and the younger generations together is a bit confusing for certain people. It's not. What do you think? Do you think that we now actually have this generational divide where the younger generation's authenticity is actually it's a different truth? It's a different type of living.
So talking about authenticity in young people, there's this element of, anyone that spends any time with young people will know they probably have a TikTok channel where they stand and pout and sing along to a song, which from my age group is probably the most inauthentic thing you can do. And that's almost sort of a cultural shift. However, I do find that there is an element of truth, definitely with the young people that we work with. There's an element of sometimes maybe not having a filter, which means that you get a very authentic approach, if that makes sense. So sometimes they'll tell you how it is. Definitely with the young people that we work with that are care experience, one of the things that's quite interesting about them is they're so used to having to tell their story every time they sit down with somebody, a new adult, because normally if they sit down with a new adult, they've got their case file, and rather than sit and watch them read it, they'll just tell them what's in it because it's just easier that way. So they have this ability to share information. Now that might not sound familiar for any other young people in their age range, but it's one thing that's really powerful about them, to the point actually with some of our mentors, they find it quite shocking. So sometimes the assumption is that when they work with these young people that they'll be really difficult to get them to open up. But as soon as there's that trust, as soon as they've proven that bit of trust, the floodgates are open and they share with them, it's stuff that actually can be quite surprising and shocking to our volunteer mentors, because they suddenly go, wow, I wasn't expecting that level of truth and honesty. I'm not sure that's a generational thing. I think that's systemic of the fact that these young people are expected to tell their story. And one of the things that's quite different about our service is they don't need to. So normally when a young person in the care system accesses a new service, there's this expectation that the person that they're meeting will have read their file, will know everything about them. In our case, we're very clear, unless there's anything from a safeguarding perspective that volunteer needs to know, that it's a blank canvas. It's just one person meeting another person. They build that relationship and they share what they feel is appropriate. And yet these young people will share massively. And because of that, once that sharing happens, there is a new level of trust. So it takes time to build the trust. Something that is quite interesting, Michael, and this is relevant to our young people, but maybe to all young people. through our systems, we're able to collect some super interesting data about what works in relationships and what doesn't. Just a headline, we have this piece of technology that we connect people on WhatsApp without them exchanging contact details. So they can share, it's just between the two of them, but they have the understanding that we might use some AI to anonymize all their data and kind of understand what's going on. And through that, we get these incredible insights into these relationships and what works and what doesn't work. And interestingly, one of the biggest indicators for trust to be built is when the volunteer shares some vulnerability and real life experience themselves. So, if you are, I'm sure social workers do this as well, but we see time and time again, those volunteers that are able to say, even if their experience was quite different, to be able to say, do you know what? I had this experience when I was roughly your age and I really struggled with this and this is how I dealt with it. Or even I didn't know how to deal with it and I messed it up. It doesn't really matter. But them sharing that little bit of their experience is a direct indicator to increasing trust quicker and actually maintaining that relationship. So it's one of the key indicators for us. And I think, again, if we talk about the younger generations being able to share and to support and to care better, I think if they are in the position like our care experience young people are, that they're willing to share their experiences and their vulnerabilities, they probably will find that they're more successful in building those relationships and building that trust.
I really want to ask a question that broadens out into wider society now, which the thinking about children, particularly the current sort of, I guess, hey, you always look after your own, right? My two teenage children, looking into their futures and what does the world hold, right? AI, jobs, all this. I would say that the one thing where I'm most concerned is, are they emotionally aware enough to be able to go into a place of employment and to be able to interact and to deal with adult life? I think when I went through that process, it was perhaps slightly easier and more formalized because there were graduate roles coming through, and I don't think those are going to be there in the future because AI is going to take it away. I think having a mentor would have been really valuable, and I'm just wondering if this is something that we should be rolling out in wider society, or because that emotional investment isn't always there for every child, care experienced or not.
I mean, I'm going to be biased on this, obviously, but I mean, I think back to my first job and how I felt like a complete melon for my first few weeks, sitting there, not knowing even the basics. And this is, again, me being very privileged, coming from a privileged background, going into your first job and you don't know how to act, you don't know what to wear, you don't know all of those things. And I think I was very lucky in my early jobs that there was always somebody that kind of hopefully looked out for me, and I had a family network to go back to at the end of the day and go, oh God, this was horrible. I didn't know what to do. And I think I'm doing it all wrong or whatever. And I think a lot of us had that informal mentoring. I think one of the risks that we face now is that you are right. We're seeing a lot of young people coming through, especially the COVID generation, that missed out on those vital formative years where where you learned those sort of support and social skills. And if you don't have those networks around you, it's really easy then, for example, if you don't have a mentor, an adult or somebody, the next person you listen to is your peers. And if your peers don't know the answers to your questions either, then suddenly it's a sort of, there's no momentum forward. Everybody sort of gets stuck. So we're massive advocates of mentoring in all places of society and actually making it formal, because it's wonderful when it happens informally, but you can't necessarily rely on it happening informally. When you can actually put in some structures in place. Oh, and that doesn't mean, I think a lot of people, when they look at mentoring, they think it has to be, right, let's sit down, let's just talk about what career you want, let's make sure you get a job in that space. It doesn't have to just be about employability. It can actually be about how are you feeling today, or what are you worried about? And it's that. So when I say formal, I mean the putting in the structures to make sure that you match people up and they get together and they go and actually do something, but not necessarily prescribing what they do in those relationships, giving them the tools to be goal orientated if they want to be. I'll tell you a super fascinating thing, which is a slight tangent off on this, Michael, is in our care leaver projects, there is no set outcome for those projects. So we don't sit there and go, by the end of this, the outcome we want to see is X number of young people in employment or this or that. No outcomes. It's purely led by the young person. What do they want? What's best for them? The fascinating thing is, and again, from analysing that data, in our recent programs, 54% of young people that came into our program were what's called NEET, not in education, employment or training. So they were basically stuck in a hole, and because of that would probably face a whole load of challenges coming in their direction, including everything from obviously having to potential homelessness. Care experienced young people are vastly more likely to be homeless, and also vastly more likely to go to prison. So they're much more likely to be, and that's again not because they're bad people, it's because they're groomed. Because actually, if you want to get a young person to come help you mule some drugs, easier to go for the young person that's got no support network to look after them, right? So it's not because they're bad people, it's their circumstances that leave them in that position. When you start to put some of those, when we put those mentoring support arrangements around them, without having those set goals, what we found was 54% were NEET. And within 12 months, 69% of those 54% had now either got into employment or made a step or educational training. So they'd moved out of NEET and made a progressive step, a significant step towards it. So that is something statistically that flies against all the other interventions. And yet it wasn't an intervention that was designed for that. It was an intervention that was designed just to give that young person some support. So if we're looking at how we support young people, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be those rigid kind of, you have to have a mentor and that mentor has to help you achieve a goal. And this is the goal. And, you come into the workplace, I'm going to give you a mentor and you've not got promoted in 3 years, then, the mentoring hasn't worked. Because the reality is if you take that off, you'll probably find that those things happen anyway. And it's wonderful now that we can provide some actual data that evidences that really shows that those progressions are happening without it necessarily having to be a focus.
It is challenging with my very, very strict social care hat on to hear someone working within social care saying, yeah, that care plan that we've got in place, it doesn't need to have outcomes or objectives. You just need to do something, crack on, and there'll be positives out of it. It sounds counter to where a lot of the system has been structured. Is that deliberate, or is that now you being deliberately antagonistic towards the system, or is it you saying there's another way of doing the system?
So I think, if I'm really honest, and this might be a surprising answer, I actually think it's being driven by AI, which is almost counterintuitive because that was what created the fear in the first place, right? But the reason I think that this is possible for us, firstly, to say, I think we've got to separate out that there is a place for care plans. I'm definitely not saying there isn't a place for those care plans. Absolutely, there is. But where I do think there is scope is at the moment when we look at people that are going into care, what we do is we measure and survey them to death. And there's something about that, especially with young people, that just makes them go, I just want to do this anymore, right? And it makes them kind of block off from the system. So then when you approach them, I'll give you an example. There are some amazing offers for young people who are in the care system or who are care experienced, but a lot of them won't take them because they're like, oh, it's just another thing that I'm going to get measured on or something, another thing I have to fill out a survey with. And actually we found that our mentors are really great at signposting the young people to them because they're not, when it comes from a mentor who's not measuring them, then suddenly they go, oh, okay, maybe I'll have a look at it. So this act of measuring, I think, creates a slight barrier to actually those outcomes happening. Where I think the reason I say that I think AI has made a difference is one of our biggest breakthroughs, not the only one, but one of our biggest breakthroughs was when we developed this communication platform. And what we didn't ask was for anybody to change their behaviour. Young people wanted to communicate on WhatsApp, so we were like, great, we'll facilitate this on WhatsApp. So for them, it's like a normal WhatsApp chat. But what happened was that then we could get an insight into how that care was evolving through that mentor, and we could learn from it. And so rather than telling the young person to change or to do something different, we could then speak to the mentors and say, mentors, this is what we've learned. This is best how to communicate. This is best how to support that young person. I think fundamentally we know that if they've got safe housing, if they can get a job and have some focus, whether that be through education or employment, if they can budget well, these key things, if they can have good mental health support, we know they're going to have better outcomes. We don't need to necessarily prescribe that. But what we've done is created a system where we know that's kind of what we want to get to, purely from common sense, but we've used the data and the AI analysis to help us get there. And then most importantly, the AI analysis also tells us when they have got there. So we don't have to say to them, have you got a job now? We can tell from the conversation, because guess what? When they get a job, the first thing they do is they go tell their mentor, oh my God, I got the job. So now I don't have to survey them and say you've got the job. The AI picks it up and goes, okay, we've got another person that's moved through the system and is now, and has got a job. So I think that where we do have to have care plans and we do have to outcomes and we do have to measure them, I think if we can be more creative about how we measure them, then I think those two, then we can get back to actual caring, and actually having the human time. And one of our big focuses is, not having to ask our volunteers, our mentors, and dare I say even our social workers that are starting to use our technology now, not having to say that you've got to report on everything, because we're going, we can see what's going on already. We don't need you to necessarily report on that conversation. We can capture the context of it. And that gives people the time to actually be human again. Most social workers don't want to be filling in loads of paperwork and ticking boxes. That's not what they joined the profession for. But they have to, because there's a lot of box ticking to be done. And I think the more we can use technology to get away from that, but not using technology to replace the human. The human is the most important. The humanity is the most important thing in this. So the more we can bring the humanity back and the more we can free up people's time so they can do that humanity, the better.
Absolutely. Certainly something that the older person sector, with the amount of data we've got, it's phenomenal, but it's too easy to become task driven. And this is what I've got to do. The moment that I want to do more often is to hold someone's hand. That moment of I'm just here for you. I know, irrespective, I'm just here. And I think a lot of providers feel that way. Just touch on your point around humanity and bringing humanity back to care. You put something on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago where you spoke about the that when someone is care experienced, their 18th birthday present is brutal independence and possibly severe isolation. I think many people would be surprised to hear that that's your 18th birthday present. Could you just unpack what that means, why that is, and what the implications are?
Yeah, so it's known as the care cliff. Now, to be clear, in certain areas, again, lottery of birth, depends what local authority, lottery of who your corporate parent is. In different locations, there are different facilities to support young people when they hit what is called the care cliff. But effectively, at 18 years old, for a young person in the care system, typically they're likely to have to leave their foster home. If they're in a foster home or if they're in a children's home, they have to leave it. They will then be on universal credits, and they basically have to go it alone. Usually they'll get support to get some form of accommodation, but typically that might be in a hostel or, somewhere, if we're honest, Michael, you and I probably wouldn't want to put our own kids at 18 years old. And I don't know if you remember yourself at 18, but when I was 18, I probably thought I knew it all, but I definitely didn't. And so I want you to imagine that you hit your 18th birthday. Most other 18-year-olds out celebrating adulthood, independence, what they feel is independence, dare I say. But they've got that safety net of they've got somewhere to live, they've got a roof over their head, they've probably got somebody providing food for them, doing their washing for them, and most importantly, they've got an emotional guide. In our care system at 18, some local authorities do some amazing work, such as, for example, called Staying Put, where they try and get the young person to stay if they can with the foster home. There's all sorts of politics around that, so I won't go into bore you on that, but it works sometimes. It doesn't work all the time. And instead, they're then suddenly living a very independent life. And not only are they living that independent life, they don't have mum and dad at the end of the phone to phone up and say, oh, do you know what? I've buggered up on this, or I feel really sad about this. They just don't have that support network. And it is brutal. It's a brutal at a time when, and dare I say, most 18-year-olds are probably still doing their A-levels or in their college courses. And it's not unusual to find care leavers at 18 having to work extra jobs, not just because they want to buy a new pair of trainers, because they want to eat, because actually if they're going to stay at college, their universal credit's probably not going to help them really live a decent standard of life. And so they're having to do things that, quite frankly, I don't believe an 18-year-old should be doing. I think I'm all up for young people growing up and getting their independence, but I do think that it is, they call it a cliff for a reason, because it is like they fall off the cliff. As I say, some local authorities, some organisations are doing some amazing work to try and kind of soften this, but that is the experience of a lot of care experienced young people. And you ask why they might be a bit bitter about society and the world. I think I would have been if that had happened to me when I was 18. I really would have done. And I think this is why I'm so passionate about the work that we do with our mentors. I cannot stress we have the most incredible volunteers, and they are all sorts of people from every background, and them just giving up a bit of their time so that when they get to that cliff, there's somebody there that they know that can help guide them through that journey. And it can be everything from how do I cook this? Like, I'm trying to learn to cook. How do I cook? I don't know how long to put this chicken in the oven for, to, oh my God, I'm going on a date. What do I wear? They're really human things, down to, I didn't get my assignment in and college is saying they're going to kick me out of the course. Or, I was a bit of a git and I smoked in the back of the classroom. Like, these are mistakes that young people make, but because they don't have that support network, no one's advocating for them. No one's fighting for them, saying, hold on a second, let's just have some perspective here. It was one cheeky fag. It wasn't, they didn't burn the school down. And it's the kind of thing that actually, as a parent myself of 4 teenagers, there are challenges every day. And as a parent, I'm not only guiding them, I'm advocating for them. If you're a young person and you don't have that, there is no other word to describe that other than brutal. It is absolutely brutal. I haven't mentioned, I should say that young people, when they do leave care, they do have what are called personal advisors, which is a different type of social worker that's there for them. And personal advisors do an amazing job. But once again, they're part of the system and they're all really stretched. They all want to do more than they probably can do. But and often they're dealing with young people at crisis point. So if you're one of those young people on the edge of crisis point, you're probably not top of the priority list. You have to wait till you're fully fledged crisis point, because there's just not the capacity to deal with it any other way.
So let's just paint a picture. We're 17. We're probably final year of A-levels, or you might just be starting it, but if you're certainly in that category. You've been in care now. That could be for any period of time, but if it's fostering, then it may have been a couple of different placements. There's some uncertainty there. You're now being told, right, you have to move out. You now have to go and find your own accommodation. You've gone from, I've had my everything's been set. I've been in my own home, and I've now got to go and live somewhere else with a bunch of people who I don't know. And I'm deliberately using general terms here because this is something we see in older persons care as well. This wrenching from home to new place to live. What you mentioned earlier that younger people are more likely, to end up in prison or what other negative outcomes. What are the negative outcomes when people leave care, and what's the timeline for that? Is it?
I think so. So yeah, homelessness is definitely up there. Grooming into crime is really prolific, and I think once you understand how that happens, it's obvious, right? Somebody comes and gives you some attention, they groom you into it. Before you know it, you can't get out of it. So that's really, really common. A lot of obviously poor and challenging mental health that can often get to crisis point. So those are some of the negative outcomes, but they're not all negative. We're focused on negative because there are a huge proportion of these young people that do some amazing things. You will see stories of young people who put themselves through university with no support, and they get themselves a place and they get through it, and they've got the world against them and they still do it. You'll see young people that go and make careers for themselves. You'll see a lot of these young people that will go back into the care sector and help other young people because they don't want young people to experience the same as what they experienced. So there are some truly wonderful, wonderful things. One of my favourite organisations to follow is an organisation called Lawyers Who Care, which is all care experienced young people that have become lawyers. And every so often you'll see one of them passes their bar exam and becomes a barrister. And you just think the odds the odds to get to that position, even if you came from the most privileged background, are massive. To do it from a care experience background, like just to get your head around the challenges that young person must have overcome to get there is just immense. So there are some truly, truly wonderful outcomes. And what often seems to be the difference, and from many of the young people that I've spoken to, and dare I say some of the older people, so people that are in their 50s and 60s who were in care when they were younger, nearly always they'll talk a story about maybe one or two people who took them under their wing, one or two people who said, I believe in you, there could be better outcomes for you. And it's that having somebody or a small collection of people that believe in you and that you know's there and you know's got your back. We know that the way our brains work is if we feel that we have some level of safety, we're more likely to take risks. Now, if you've had a really troublesome background, a risk could be just going out the front door. And if you haven't got that support network, you don't even go out the front door. So how are you going to make any progress if that is where your risk appetite is? Whereas once you get some support network around you, you can start moving forward and doing things that otherwise you wouldn't do. And that's where that supportive relationships come in so much. So in our case, it might be mentoring, but in any case, having those people that give you the safety net to go try things, to do things. And again, I'm sure it's similar, Michael, with the older social care. The person that's there that says, don't worry, let's go out and do something because we'll make sure you get back okay, or we'll make sure that it's safe or whatever it might be. It's exactly the same thing. It gives people that belief that they can actually try things, which means they start to live their life to their potential. And in the situations where we find care experience get that support, they excel. They have the ability to absolutely fly because do you know what? They've got so much resilience and they've got so much life experience already. Most 18-year-old care experience young people are going to have more life experience than probably most 30, 40-year-olds. So they've got so much inherent wisdom coming with it, some trauma. But then they also will start to have some stuff around actually how do you overcome the trauma and so on. So just so much experience. And that's why I think as a society, we should be celebrating them and we should be absolutely putting them on a pedestal and praising them and supporting them, but giving them the support that they need, not the support we think they need. And I think that's where it comes down to is listening to what they want, how they want to be supported, and then supporting them. And again, I'm sure that goes for adult social care, not giving them the support that we think they need. What is the support that they want, that they think they need?
The question I'm going to ask is how on earth are we going to achieve that? How do you change the system to achieve that?
One relationship at a time. My view, and my honest view, Michael, is we have to stop looking at this as a corporate problem. So we talk about corporate parenting, and fundamentally, if you're a child in care, your parent is the local authority. And we have this view, I don't know if this is an inherent view, but I pay my taxes and that goes to the local government and the local government look after the young people. Unfortunately, in my view, that's never going to work because there's never going to be the resource to do it properly or the variety to do it properly, the variety of people, the variety of experiences. In my view, I really feel that as a society, community if every person can just do a little bit. And that doesn't have to be, sometimes go, well, me doing my bit, what do I have to be? Do I have to adopt a child? Do I have to be a foster parent? No, you don't have to go that far, but do something. Find a charity or an organisation that is doing something for younger people, from older people in your society, in your community. And I think if everybody does a little bit, it raises awareness. If we raise awareness, we reduce stigmas and we reduce, biases. But also, it suddenly means that you're coming together, and it works for everyone. I cannot tell you how many times our mentors say to us, I really feel like this is not fair because I feel like I'm getting more from it than my young person. And because they enjoy it so much joy comes from this, especially, dare I say, in a world where everything's a bit out of control and it's all a bit crazy, to have that relationship where you can actually really make a difference, and you can get even weeks down the line and go, wow, look at the difference that we've made together. It's gold dust. So it does a lot for the mentors' mental health. So the people that are helping, so everyone in the community, that would be my thing. I am obviously, I'm a little bit of an optimist, to say the least. But I think if there was one solution, it would be every person not doing loads, but just doing a little bit. Some of us want to do more than others. That's fine. But if we can all get in, again, with older people. My son goes to a care home every week, and he has a ball of a time. He loves it, and he comes back and tells me he's been flirting with the old ladies and all sorts of things. And jokingly, but he has a lovely time. He goes and he's organised a bingo competition for them and all sorts of things, and he gets so much joy out of it. If we could, and again, installing that from younger years, if we can get young people doing that, we can get everybody in society doing a little bit. And I appreciate everybody's busy, everyone's got a lot of commitments, but do you know what? If you look at it as a leisure activity, what you get from it is so enriching that actually you would want to do it all day anyway. So, well, maybe not all day, but you'd want to do it at least once a week. And that was what would make a real difference. That's my utopia.
So my son's doing GCSE history. I have the privilege of learning about the Elizabethan period and helping him with it. So therefore, the 1603 Poor Act is right there in the front of my head, which is this wonderful piece of legislation in the face of economic challenges. You've got war, you've got climate change because of volcanoes going off in the Pacific, which is a bit weird, causing food shortages. You've got a population crisis, too many people in the rural areas coming to the cities, trying to find work, what have you. Loads of themes that are really similar to today. And the Elizabethan period said, well, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to have everyone is going to pay a small tithe, and there's essentially a taxation system that is going to be collected locally, and the local parish is going to be responsible for the provision of care. So we've had 420 years of corporate parentship. What you're proposing is a fundamental change, I think, to how society operates in the UK, that we no longer go to this, we don't have a sort of a singular societal responsibility for care. We have an individual but collective responsibility for the care of others.
Just to be clear, Michael, you do still need the systems in place. Like, you couldn't get rid of social care. That you will still need those structures in place. What I'm talking about is on top of that, if everybody did their little bit, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does, and it's rebuild. It's having a national conversation about how we rebuild social care to work for the majority, not just the minority. Again, a thesis is that social care is going to become a majority thing that we all get involved in at some point. We're all aging, mental health crises in our children. There's the middle group as well who are requiring of social care. Do you think we're ready for this conversation as a nation?
I think it's a really interesting question. Do I think we're ready? I wish we were. I think there's pockets of society that are ready for it. I think there's a growing discontent with lack of community. If you look back through history again, we used to have much more stronger community structures, whether that be a lot of the time it was around religion and churches, but that we had that sense of community. And that has very much stripped away. And so now people, you hear about people that live on a road and have never met their neighbours, or don't engage in their society. And there's some people that like it that way, and that's fine. And on the flip side, we have digital communities. Whatever interest you have in the world, you can find someone online where you can connect with that community. But I do feel that with a lot of the political changes and things that we're seeing in the world at the moment, if you look at the sort of extremism, it's because people are going, no, I want my community, right? But what they might be saying is it might be coming from a place of prejudice rather than a place of uniting people. And I think, I always think these things work in cycles. I think we're going to have to go quite far in one direction to realise that maybe that's not quite right, to go back in the other direction. So are we ready for it? I think there's groups of society that are ready for it. There's pockets of society that are ready for it, who will be the true kind of pioneers of it. And then, and I'm not talking about small scale, I think larger scale. If I look at when we've gone out to recruit mentors, we have a waiting list of over 700 mentors across the UK who are desperate to support a young person. We actually sometimes cannot get enough young people or enough funding to run programs to fulfill the demand for mentors, and we haven't recruited for years because we've got so many volunteer mentors. When we went out and started recruiting, we were inundated with volunteers that wanted to be part of this. So there was definitely that need and that desire. And when we talk to volunteers, they tell us, look, I want to do something meaningful. I want to do something that gives back, that has purpose. I think there is, we've gone through many years of where people have actually wanted to make a difference. And for many years that became picking up litter, painting a fence, or whatever it might be, because that was a way that we felt connected into our local community and to make a difference. But now people are looking at it going, I don't really cut it anymore. I want to do something that really makes a difference. And when you talk to people about what that is, often that is helping change another person's life. Like, what other privilege can you have to actually walk alongside somebody? And again, all of our mentors will tell you it's not them that helps the change, it's the young person that does it themselves. But they get this honour and privilege of walking alongside them and supporting them as they do that. And that is truly incredible. So there is a huge demand from people to do that kind of thing. But what we need is more channels for them to do it. And I think typically the channels that we've had have been very much become a social worker, or adopt, or become a foster carer. That's a pretty big fundamental life choice. Now, for some people, it's an amazing life choice. And for the right people, I mean, you fill your boots, go do it, because it is just incredible. But for other people, their life circumstances mean that just wouldn't work for them. And it's often been a bit of an all or nothing. You can either go and do, completely go all out, adopt a child, or nothing. And now, what I think we need to do is to shift that, and to shift it in terms of sort of society takes care of everyone, is shift the expectation that it's not that you give up your life for this. It's actually, if you could send the odd WhatsApp message every so often, and, maybe go for a coffee once a quarter and have a phone call once a month, that is life-changing, both for you and for the young person. So as a society, I think when we shift our expectations about what is expected of us to make a difference, suddenly it becomes more, oh yeah, I could do that. I'd like to do that. And hopefully there's always this kind of momentum curve. Once you get more people doing it, it becomes the norm, and other people go, well, I should be doing it. If everyone else is doing it, I'm not getting that experience. And if every time one of our mentors shares with their young person the story of the difference that it's made, it makes others go, oh, can I do that? How do you do that? I want to do it. So again, that's why those mentors are so important in being those ambassadors and advocates, because they are the shining light for others to say, look what can happen. Look what you could be part of. Instead of just going home every day after work and kind of thinking, feeling a bit flat, go and have a few WhatsApp messages and have an amazing connection with a young person, and you'll learn more than you ever think you're going to learn. You might even learn about, TikTok and stuff.
Perish thought. You mentioned earlier about how our communities are drifting away from us. This is not my quote. I'm paraphrasing from someone else, but we used to get our religious grounding from churches. We used to get our social grounding in the pub, and we used to get the money to be able to do everything else from work. No one goes to church anymore. The pubs are all closing, and now work is having to do that. And I can imagine that for an individual who is in employment, sorry, not in employment, or is still in education, is in that sort of 18 to 21 bracket. Actually, not having any of those frameworks is incredibly challenging. And this isn't just a care experience position. This is
All young people, yeah.
And at the same time, if they're all online, the chances are that the algorithm will start to feed them inappropriate stuff, as we might see, but certain extremist views, which Louis Theroux can do a better documentary on than either of us. I suppose it's if we're saying we want more people to go out and mentor and to be that volunteer, it's not just for the care experience. It's how do we get people supporting in wider society and doing those wider roles?
Yeah, and if you also look at family structures, family structures have broken down. I know for that not as many young people necessarily have the same connection with grandparents, if they even are in a traditional family setting that they used to. So a lot of those societal structures that we used to have broken down. And I do honestly believe that if we start to bring back more of these formal structures, and unfortunately to do it, you have to be a bit formal. You have to, dare I say, governments have to invest in this kind of stuff to make it happen. The thing I think that's interesting about it is, intuitively, I think we know it works. Like when we see it happen, we know it works. Like you don't need evidence. You just see it, right? You see a young person, you receive a group of young people that go through a transformation, or an older people that go through a transformation. You know it works. However, we have to appreciate that we live in a society where there's a lot of transparency, which I think is a great thing. But that means it's really hard, for example, for governments to invest in things that there isn't that evidence trail. And I think this is where maybe things like mentoring have struggled before, because there isn't that evidence trail of, somebody goes and mentors. It's often seen as like a nice to do, a bit fluffy, nice thing to do. We're pretty sure it works, but we can't really quantify it. So there you go. And I think that's where we've really driven this tech side of things, because if we can prove it works, the stats that we've just kicked out in our last care levers report, there is no question, not just is this working, but how much it's working. And we're just about to do some comparative data to other sort of statutory services to just show how incredibly this is working. Now we start to get that data, then maybe we get the opportunity to go to governments and to policymakers and to go to businesses and to schools and to all parts of our society and go, listen, come give this a try, see what the data shows you, because we promise once you see it, you'll want to do more of it. And I think that might have been definitely in my time in the kind of mentoring sector, that has been one of the missing parts, is being able to get that real, genuine data that shows that it has. And the only reason that there have been lots of other technologies and things that have been set up to do this, the thing that's different is, I think, because we've done it through WhatsApp, we're not asking anyone to change their behaviour. If you ask people to fill in surveys, we know you only get the people that had the really good experience. You don't get the ones that didn't have a good experience. So it's not really valuable data. Whereas now that we can have that oversight across all relationships, you start to go, okay, we can really start to understand and see where this goes well and where it doesn't, and learn from that. So I think to move us in that direction, we, as a society, kind of people need to step up and do it. But in my experience, if you ask them, they're absolutely ready to step up. Not everyone. It's not always going to be for everyone, but most people are looking to step up. So then we need the structures and the investment in place to make that happen, so that actually these programs do come about, not just from us, but from all sorts of organisations that are doing incredible work in this space, providing that human connection. And going back to kind of where we are as a society, there's all this fear around AI and what's it going to do. More so than ever, we need human connection. More so than ever, we need people to not be, just losing themselves online. We need somebody that speaks to them. I've often got asked, would you ever do like an AI create an AI mentor on a, so that we could just connect a young person up with an AI person. And my answer to that, and you can, call me up if I ever change it, but I'm pretty sure I won't, is categorically no, because this is about human connection. This is about the imperfections of being a human. It's about not knowing the right thing to say when you need to say it, and that being okay. Most of our mentees will say the most poignant moment is when they've spoken to their mentor and their mentor didn't have the right answer and they were really surprised they didn't, and they went, oh, so you don't know it all either, maybe I don't need to know it all. So it's that real kind of beautiful messiness of humanity that is so important, and that's what we need to be grabbing onto. So we take the AI and the tools that we've got to make us better at being humans, not removing the humanity from what we do. And that's where I think if we can invest in those kind of things, that's where we'll start to see, or where I believe the fundamental shifts are for us in our social care system, is we can put in processes in place as much as we want, but until we find ways to truly bring back the humanity, we're just going to keep bumping our heads against the same problems but in just different guises.
That's a absolutely beautiful picture of social care governed by humanity. It's governed and regulated by its very own humanity. That's a lovely picture. Francesca, I don't want to take too much of your time. You've given so much of it already. Thank you so much. One final question, two final questions actually before we go. One about around goal 17.
Mm.
What do you think the future holds for your organisation?
Super interesting question. We do a lot of thinking about this. So volunteering and mentoring is always going to be at the core of what we do. We're so, as you can tell, so passionate about it. We're also seeing that we're in a really privileged position, that we've developed some technology that has categorically changed our programs, and we think it's right to give that to the world. So we are in the process at the moment of exploring how others can use our technology. We want to license it out to others because we just think it's if others can have that, both that human experience and have the data and the learning and all the other stuff we get from it, then that will form a big part of what we'll do in the future. But really just to keep kind of shining a light on opportunities where there is where more people can get involved in making a change in their communities and societies will always be at our core and our heart. Whether we get technology involved in or not, that will always be where we're at. Hoping that we can get others to evidence the impact that they're making through one-to-one relationships is really where we hope to take this in the future.
Brilliant. And if people wanted to get in touch with you or are interested in volunteering, where would they find it?
Best place to go is goal17.global. So GOAL17.global is our website. You can find us on there. And by all means, find me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. I know I've got a really difficult surname to spell, Salussolia, but the good news is if you can get half of the spelling right, I'm the only one on there with that kind of name. So probably one of the only few people on there. So please do search for me on LinkedIn, Francesca Salussolia. I always love to connect with people.
Francesca, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. All the best. See you soon.
Thanks, Michael. See you soon.
Thank you.